June 5th, 2024. Two veteran astronauts climb into a brand new spacecraft for what's supposed to be an 8-day test flight. By mid-June, they should be home. Instead, they spent 9 months trapped on the International Space Station while Boeing and NASA argued about whether their ride was safe enough to bring them back.
And when I say argued, I mean engineers were literally running tests in the desert trying to figure out why thrusters kept failing and helium kept leaking.
So let me get this straight. Boeing sent astronauts to space in a capsule that wasn't ready.
Oh, it gets so much worse than that. The Starliner program was already years behind schedule, billions over budget, and had failed its first major test. This was supposed to be their redemption arc.
Spoiler alert, it wasn't.
Not even close. Welcome to the Starliner astronauts' 1 week that became 8 months in space. I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez.
And I'm Marcus Chen. Today, we're diving into one of the most traumatic space missions in recent history, a story about two incredibly calm Navy test pilots, a spacecraft held together by hopes and prayers, and the moment NASA had to make a call that basically said, Boeing, we love you, but we're calling SpaceX.
It's corporate space drama meets actual life or death engineering problems. And somehow through all of it, Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams just kept working, kept smiling, and kept telling everyone, we're fine, really.
Which is the most test pilot thing ever. Oh, the thrusters failed. The helium's leaking. We're potentially stuck in space indefinitely? No worries. We're having a great time.
Literally what they said in July, verbatim.
So buckle up because we're about to tell you how an 8-day mission turned into a 9-month ordeal, how Boeing's reputation went from trusted aerospace giant to please stop embarrassing us, and how two astronauts handled being the most famous stranded people since, Tom Hanks in Castaway?
Except their volleyball was a multi-billion-dollar spacecraft that couldn't stop leaking.
All right, Elena, set the scene for us. June 2024. Who are these astronauts and what were they trying to accomplish?
So we're talking about Barry Butch Wilmore and Sunita Suni Williams, two of NASA's most experienced astronauts. Butch is a retired Navy captain, former fighter pilot who flew combat missions over Iraq and Bosnia, pastor at his local church, builds furniture in his spare time, total badass.
And Suni Williams?
Navy captain, helicopter test pilot, ran the Boston Marathon from space while orbiting Earth, set multiple spacewalking records. She'd already spent 322 days in space before this mission. These aren't rookies. They're the people you send when you need calm, competent professionals.
So NASA sent their A-team.
Absolutely, because this wasn't a routine flight, it was the Boeing crew flight test, the first time Boeing's Starliner capsule would carry humans. This was make or break for Boeing's entire commercial crew program.
And the program had already been troubled.
That's diplomatic. Okay, so context. After the space shuttle retired in 2011, NASA wanted two companies to provide crew transport to the ISS. They gave SpaceX $2.6 billion and Boeing $4.2 billion to develop crew capsules.
Wait, Boeing got almost twice as much money?
Because they were Boeing, the company that built Apollo program components, space shuttle parts, the trusted aerospace giant. They were supposed to be the safe, reliable choice compared to upstart SpaceX.
How'd that work out?
SpaceX flew their first crewed mission in May 2020 and has since completed dozens of successful flights. Boeing's Starliner, first uncrewed test in December 2019, was a near disaster. Software glitch left it in the wrong orbit, never reached the ISS.
Yikes.
Second uncrewed test in May 2022 finally succeeded, but then they found problems with the parachute system and flammable tape on wiring. Those fixes took another 2 years. By the time they're ready for the crewed test in 2024, Boeing has lost over $1.5 billion on cost overruns and is desperate for a win.
So the pressure was on.
Immense pressure. And then the launch attempts start going wrong immediately. First try, May 6th, scrubbed because of a valve problem on the rocket. Then engineers discover a helium leak in one of the Starliner's propulsion modules.
Helium leak, that's bad, right?
It's not great. Helium is used to pressurize the propulsion system so the thrusters can fire. A leak means you're losing pressure, which could affect your ability to maneuver. But the engineering team analyzed it and decided the leak was small enough to fly with.
So they knew about the leak before launch.
They did, and honestly, that was probably the right call at the time. Test flights are supposed to find problems. But then...
There were more problems.
Oh, so many more. Next launch attempt, June 1st, scrubbed because of a computer hardware fault on the ground. They finally get off the pad on June 5th at 10:52 p.m. Eastern Time. Atlas V rocket works perfectly. Starliner separates. Astronauts are euphoric. Butch literally said, "It is just an amazing, amazing spacecraft."
Past tense is doing a lot of work there.
Because within hours, everything goes sideways. As they're approaching the ISS on June 6th, flight controllers discover 2 more helium leaks, different parts of the propulsion system. Then, 5 of the 28 reaction control system thrusters fail.
5 thrusters just stopped working?
Degraded to the point they couldn't fire properly. These are the small thrusters you need for precise maneuvering during docking. You're trying to align with a moving target in orbit, and suddenly a bunch of your thrusters aren't responding correctly.
So they're approaching the ISS with a malfunctioning spacecraft.
Exactly. The docking gets delayed about an hour while Butch and Suni manually fly the capsule, testing thrusters, working with ground control to bring 4 of the 5 failed thrusters back online. They eventually dock successfully, but everyone knows something is seriously wrong.
And at this point, they're supposed to stay 8 days?
That was the plan. June 6th docking, June 14th return. Nice, clean test mission. But NASA immediately extends to June 18th to give engineers time to understand the thruster issues and helium leaks. Then they extend again, and again, and again. And by late June, there's no return date set at all.
Because they didn't know if Starliner could safely bring them home.
Right. The spacecraft is docked at the ISS. The astronauts are fine, but the service module, the part with all the thrusters and helium tanks, is showing multiple failures. And here's the kicker. The service module gets jettisoned before re-entry and burns up in the atmosphere. So any testing has to happen while it's still attached to the ISS.
You can't bring it home to study it.
Exactly. Whatever went wrong, they have to figure it out from orbit or by running tests at ground facilities using spare hardware. And the clock is ticking because Starliner is taking up a docking port that other missions need.
So what did they find?
Engineers identified multiple issues. The helium leaks, they eventually found 5 separate leaks, were traced to a flange where propellant lines come together, probably a seal that was crimped or defective. The thruster failures were more mysterious.
Mysterious how?
So they ran hot fire tests, basically firing the thrusters while Starliner was docked, and found that a Teflon seal in the thruster propellant system would swell when exposed to high heat. The swelling blocked propellant flow, which degraded thruster performance.
A Teflon seal. The entire mission is hanging on a Teflon seal.
Multiple Teflon seals, actually. And the problem is, you can replicate the failure on the ground using spare hardware, but you can't prove with certainty that's exactly what's happening in orbit. There's always some uncertainty in space.
Okay, so by midsummer 2024, Boeing and NASA have 2 astronauts on the ISS, a spacecraft with multiple failures, and no clear path home. What's the mood like?
Publicly, everyone's calm and measured. NASA keeps saying Butch and Suni aren't stranded, they're not in danger, there's plenty of food and supplies. The astronauts themselves give a press conference from space in July where Suni literally says, "We are having a great time here on ISS."
And privately?
Engineers are freaking out because the question isn't just, can we get them home? The question is, can we get them home safely on Starliner, or do we need to admit the spacecraft isn't ready and find another option?
Which means calling SpaceX.
Which means the ultimate humiliation for Boeing, admitting their capsule failed on its first crewed test while their competitor has to bail them out. That's a corporate and political nightmare.
But it's also life and death.
Exactly, and that's the tension that dominates the entire summer of 2024. Do you trust the spacecraft, or do you trust your gut that says something's not right?
Okay, so it's July 2024. Butch and Suni have been on the ISS for a month. What's NASA's decision-making process look like?
It's intense.
They're running constant tests, hot fires of the thrusters, analysis of the helium system, simulations using ground hardware. Boeing engineers are at White Sands testing facility in New Mexico, basically recreating the thruster failures to understand the root cause.
And Boeing is confident Starliner is safe.
Boeing keeps saying publicly that they're confident the spacecraft can bring the crew home safely. Mark Nappy, Boeing's Starliner program manager, tells reporters in late June, "We're not stuck on ISS. The crew is not in any danger."
But NASA wasn't so sure.
NASA had serious concerns. Steve Stitch, who manages NASA's commercial crew program, is in this impossible position where he has to balance Boeing's engineering data against the safety of the crew. And there's this constant back and forth. Boeing says the data looks good, NASA asks for more tests, Boeing provides more data, NASA still isn't satisfied.
Because
the thrusters that failed during docking, particularly that one thruster that never came back online, showed degraded performance that couldn't be fully explained. Yes, the Teflon seal theory makes sense. Yes, the ground tests replicate some of the issues, but you can't be 100% certain that's the whole story.
And with human lives on the line, pretty sure isn't good enough.
Exactly. And there's this haunting historical context that nobody's saying out loud, but everyone's thinking about. Challenger and Columbia. Both disasters came from engineering teams saying it'll probably be fine when data suggested otherwise.
So NASA's being extra cautious because they don't want another catastrophic failure.
Right. And the more they test, the more uncomfortable they get. By early August, NASA brings in additional propulsion experts, basically a second opinion from the immediate team. That's when you know leadership is genuinely worried.
What was the breaking point?
The uncertainty around deorbit. So to come home, Starliner has to fire its thrusters to slow down and drop out of orbit. If those thrusters don't work reliably during that critical burn, you could end up in the wrong trajectory, which could mean anything from landing in the wrong place to not surviving re-entry at all.
Jesus.
And the engineers couldn't guarantee the thrusters would work as needed. Boeing's position was essentially, we think it'll be okay based on our data. NASA's position became, we need more than we think.
So what happened?
On August 24th, 2024, NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, the big boss, holds a press conference, and he drops the hammer. NASA has decided Butch and Suni will not return on Starliner. The spacecraft will come home empty, and the astronauts will return on a SpaceX Dragon capsule.
That must have been devastating for Boeing.
It was a public humiliation. Nelson phrases it carefully, talking about safety being NASA's core value and their North Star, emphasizing that spaceflight is risky even under the best circumstances. But the subtext is clear. We don't trust your spacecraft with our astronauts.
And how did Boeing respond?
Publicly, they said they supported NASA's decision and would continue working with the agency. Privately, I imagine there were a lot of very tense meetings. They'd just had their first crewed test mission declared too risky to bring the crew home. That's about the worst outcome possible.
And for Butch and Suni, they just found out their ride home is canceled and they're stuck in space for how much longer?
At least 6 more months. Because NASA's plan is to integrate them into the regular ISS crew rotation. SpaceX's Crew 9 mission was scheduled to launch in late September with 4 astronauts. NASA decides to send up only 2 astronauts, leaving 2 seats empty for Butch and Suni to return on.
So they go from test pilots on an 8-day mission to full-time ISS crew members for half a year.
Exactly. They transition from being Starliner crew to being part of Expeditions 71 and 72 on the ISS. And here's what's wild. They both handle it with incredible grace.
Really?
Yeah. In September, they give their first press conference after the decision. Suni says something like, "We've been preparing for this kind of thing our whole careers. This is what test pilots do. We handle the unexpected." Butch adds that the transition wasn't instantaneous in his mind, but they're fully capable of doing long-duration missions.
Meanwhile, they'd packed for 8 days.
Right? They had actually left their luggage behind because the Starliner needed space to carry a pump to fix a malfunctioning toilet on the ISS. So they took off with less than 8 days of personal items for what turned into a 9-month trip.
That's actually hilarious in a tragic way.
Fortunately, supply missions regularly visit the ISS. Northrop Grumman Cygnus cargo spacecraft showed up in early August with, as NASA put it diplomatically, some items such as clothes, some personal food items, things like that.
NASA sent them a care package because they'd been in space a month longer than planned with basically no luggage.
Pretty much. And it keeps getting better, or worse, depending on your perspective. In December, NASA announces another delay. The Dragon capsule they're supposed to return on is having processing delays. New return date? No earlier than late March 2025.
So now it's not 8 months, it's 9 months.
9 months. And the media is having a field day with this. Stranded astronauts, stuck in space, abandoned. Even though NASA keeps insisting they're not stranded, they're fully integrated crew members doing important work.
Are they doing important work, or is that just PR spin?
No, they genuinely are. They're conducting experiments, doing maintenance, performing spacewalks. In fact, during a January 2025 spacewalk, Suni breaks the record for most cumulative spacewalk time by a female astronaut. Over 62 hours total across her career.
So she literally set a record while stranded.
Yep. And in September 2024, she takes command of the ISS for the second time in her career. These aren't people sitting around waiting for rescue. They're running the space station.
But they had to be frustrated.
I mean, probably, but they never show it publicly. Every interview, every press conference, they're upbeat and professional. Suni talks about how being in space is her happy place. Butch's wife, Deanna, tells a reporter, "He just takes it knowing the Lord's in control, and since the Lord's in control of it, he's content where he is."
That's some serious zen.
Or serious training. Test pilots are selected for their ability to stay calm under pressure. These two are demonstrating exactly why NASA picked them for this mission.
Okay, but let's talk about what's happening back on Earth. The Starliner comes home empty in September 2024, right?
September 6th, NASA and Boeing remotely pilot it away from the ISS, and it performs an autonomous re-entry and landing at White Sands Space Harbor in New Mexico. And here's the kicker. It lands perfectly.
What?
All the thrusters work during deorbit, the parachutes deploy correctly, the capsule touches down exactly where it's supposed to. Textbook landing.
So it could have brought them home safely.
Maybe. Or maybe the thrusters worked fine that time but would have failed with crew aboard, or under different circumstances. That's the thing about engineering risk. You're dealing with probabilities, not certainties. NASA made the call that the risk was unacceptable, and nothing about the successful autonomous landing definitively proves they were wrong.
But Boeing has to be thinking, see, we told you it was safe.
Possibly, but they're also dealing with a program that is now even further behind schedule and deeper in the red financially. The question becomes, what's next for Starliner?
All right, we need to talk about Boeing's broader context here because Starliner isn't happening in isolation. What's going on with Boeing as a company in 2024?
Where do I even start? Boeing is having a multi-year crisis across basically all their programs. The 737 MAX had those fatal crashes in 2018 and 2019, was grounded for 2 years, and then in January 2024, literally months before Starliner launches, a door plug blows out mid-flight on an Alaska Airlines 737 MAX 9.
That's the one where the chunk of the fuselage just left the plane?
At 16,000 feet, yes. Passengers filming their near-death experience while their phones are literally being sucked out of the aircraft. It's a miracle nobody died. And the investigation reveals Boeing's manufacturing quality control is a complete disaster.
So NASA is watching all this while deciding whether to trust Boeing's spacecraft.
Exactly. And it's not just the MAX. Boeing's got cost overruns on the KC-46 tanker program, delays on the 777X, issues with their military aircraft programs. The company's reputation has gone from trusted aerospace leader to how did they screw this up too?
And Starliner fits right into that pattern.
It's textbook Boeing 2020's problems. Remember, they got $4.2 billion from NASA, almost double what SpaceX got, and they've burned through all of it, plus at least $1.5 billion in cost overruns. They're years behind schedule. Their first test flight failed, and now their first crewed test can't bring the crew home.
Meanwhile, SpaceX is launching multiple crew missions a year with
basically no issues.
Which must drive Boeing absolutely crazy. SpaceX, this upstart company that didn't even exist when Boeing was building Saturn V rockets, is now eating their lunch. SpaceX got less money, delivered earlier, and flies more reliably.
What went wrong at Boeing?
That's a whole other podcast. But the short version, culture change. Old Boeing pre-McDonnell Douglas merger in 1997 was engineering-driven. The joke was, if it's not Boeing, I'm not going. They built reliable aircraft with a focus on safety and quality.
And new Boeing?
After the merger, the company became more corporate-focused, more cost-cutting, more financialization. Manufacturing got outsourced, experienced engineers retired or were laid off, institutional knowledge evaporated. The focus shifted from build it right to build it cheap and fast.
And that works great until something breaks.
Or until you're building spacecraft where cheap and fast can kill people. SpaceX, by contrast, has this iterative approach. Build, test, break things, learn, rebuild. They embrace failure as a learning tool. Boeing's culture became one where admitting problems was seen as weakness.
So you get Starliner launching with known helium leaks.
Right. And look, I don't want to be unfair. Spaceflight is inherently risky, and every program has issues. But there's a pattern with Boeing where problems get minimized or dismissed until they become crises.
Like when they kept saying we're confident about Starliner even as NASA was getting increasingly nervous.
Exactly. There's this corporate pressure to project confidence, to not admit weakness, to insist everything's under control. And sometimes that confidence is justified, but sometimes it's wishful thinking masquerading as engineering analysis.
So what's the current status? Is Starliner dead?
It's complicated. NASA hasn't canceled the program. They still want 2 providers for ISS access, but Boeing has to prove Starliner can fly safely. They're planning another uncrewed test flight, probably in 2026, to demonstrate that they fixed the thruster and helium issues.
2 years away.
At minimum. And even if that test goes well, NASA will probably require another full demonstration before certifying Starliner for regular crewed flights. So we're talking 2027 or later before Starliner might fly astronauts again, a decade after it was supposed to be operational.
Meanwhile, the ISS is scheduled to be deorbited in 2030.
Yeah, that timeline doesn't quite work, does it? By the time Starliner is ready, there might not be an ISS to fly to.
So Boeing spent billions of dollars and a decade developing a spacecraft that might make a handful of flights before its destination gets destroyed.
Unless they can pivot to supporting commercial space stations, which several companies are planning to launch in the late 2020s, then yes, that's the situation. Though honestly, I think Boeing would be happy to just get Starliner certified at this point, even if it never flies commercially. It's about salvaging reputation.
Let's talk about the political angle, because this got weirdly political.
Oh, spectacularly political. In January 2025, newly inaugurated President Trump tweets, or posts on Truth Social, whatever he's using, that the Biden administration virtually abandoned Butch and Suni in space.
Which is not accurate.
Not remotely accurate. NASA had a return plan in place for months. Integrate them into Crew 9, bring them home in early 2025. That was always the timeline once they decided Starliner was too risky. There was no abandonment.
But Trump and Elon Musk made it sound like there was some emergency rescue needed.
Right. Musk tweets something like, "The president has asked SpaceX to bring home the 2 astronauts stranded at the space station as soon as possible. We will do so." And Trump follows up with, "I've asked Elon to go get the astronauts."
Except SpaceX was already scheduled to bring them home.
Exactly. It's political theater. Musk is trying to make SpaceX look like the hero saving the day. Trump is attacking the previous administration, and they're both acting like NASA wasn't already handling the situation.
How did Butch and Suni respond to becoming political pawns?
Very carefully. In their post-return press conference in March 2025, they're asked about the political rhetoric. Butch says he was somewhat aware of it, but never felt abandoned. They stayed diplomatic, don't take sides, keep it professional.
classic test pilot response.
Absolutely. Don't get involved in politics, stay focused on the mission, trust the process. They handled the whole situation with incredible professionalism.
Okay, so walk me through the actual return. March 2025, right?
March 18th, 2025. Butch and Suni board the SpaceX Dragon capsule along with Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbanov, the two astronauts from Crew 9 who'd been wrapping up their 6-month mission. They undock from the ISS, do the deorbit burn, and splash down off the coast of Florida after a 17-hour journey.
And how are they after 9 months in space?
Physically, they're carried out of the capsule on stretchers, which is normal for long-duration missions. Your body adapts to microgravity, and readjusting to Earth's gravity is rough on your muscles and cardiovascular system. You need time to readjust.
So they literally can't walk.
Not immediately. You need time to readjust. Some astronauts recover faster than others, but 9 months in space means serious muscle atrophy and bone density loss, even with daily exercise. They'll go through weeks of rehabilitation.
And emotionally?
Suni said the first thing she wanted to do was hug her husband and her dogs. Butch's dadder posted on TikTok about being reunited with her dad after 9 months. They seemed genuinely happy to be home, which is understandable. No matter how professional you are, 9 unexpected months away from family is rough.
Especially when you packed for 8 days.
Right. Though Butch mentioned he was able to FaceTime his family several times a day from the ISS, which helped. Modern technology makes space feel a bit less isolated.
Still, video calls with a significant time delay aren't the same as being there for your kids' soccer games or whatever.
Not at all, and that's the human cost that sometimes gets lost in all of the technical discussions. These are real people with families who missed 9 months of their lives because of spacecraft failures.
Okay, I want to step back from the drama and talk about the practical reality. What was daily life like for Butch and Suni during their extended stay?
So first, understand that the ISS is a pretty comfortable place as space goes. It's about the size of a 6-bedroom house, 290 feet long, 356 feet wide at its widest point, pressurized volume equivalent to a Boeing 747. There are sleeping quarters, exercise equipment, laboratories, windows with amazing views.
But it's also cramped, right?
By Earth standards, yes. You're living and working in tight spaces with several other people. During their stay, there were 7 to 9 crew members on station at various times. That's a lot of people sharing limited space.
What's the daily schedule?
Highly structured. Wake up, personal hygiene, breakfast, morning briefing with mission control, then work blocks, usually 6.5 hours of scheduled activities. That could be scientific experiments, station maintenance, exercise, cargo transfer operations, whatever's on the timeline. Then dinner, evening briefing, personal time, sleep.
And they have to exercise every day?
Mandatory 2 hours minimum. Microgravity is brutal on your body. Without gravity forcing you to work your muscles and bones, everything atrophies fast. They use resistance machines, a treadmill, and a stationary bike that requires straps to keep them down since there's no gravity.
2 hours a day of forced exercise while you're also working full shifts. That's rough.
And the exercise isn't fun gym time, it's medical necessity. Without it, you'd come home with severe muscle loss and bone density problems that could take months or years to recover.
What about food?
Mostly prepackaged meals, thermostabilized pouches, freeze-dried items, some canned food. They occasionally get fresh fruit and vegetables on cargo resupply missions, which is apparently a huge morale boost. For Thanksgiving 2024, NASA sent up a special meal: smoked turkey, cranberry sauce, green beans, mashed potatoes.
Living the dream.
Suni gave an interview in November saying, "We have a bunch of food that we've packed away that is Thanksgiving-ish," and seemed genuinely excited about it. When you've been eating pre-packaged space food for months, a holiday meal is a big deal.
What about hygiene? I've heard horror stories about space toilets.
Ugh. The space toilet is legendarily complicated. It uses suction to pull waste away from your body since gravity doesn't help. And yes, it breaks regularly. That's actually why Butch and Suni had to leave their luggage behind, because Starliner needed to carry a pump to fix a toilet malfunction.
So the reason they were stuck with 8 days of clothes for 9 months is because a space toilet needed fixing.
Space exploration is very glamorous, as you can see.
What about showers?
There are no showers. You clean yourself with wet wipes in a small amount of water. NASA developed no rinse shampoo specifically for space. It's not comfortable, but you adapt.
For 9 months.
For 9 months. Though honestly, after a few weeks, you probably stop noticing as much. The human capacity for adaptation is pretty remarkable.
Okay, tell me about the fun stuff. What's the best part of being on the ISS?
The views, hands down. The ISS orbits at about 250 miles up, completing one orbit every 90 minutes. That means you see a sunrise or sunset every 45 minutes. You're looking down on Earth from this unique perspective. You can see entire coastlines, weather systems, city lights at night.
Suni mentioned that was one of her favorite things, right?
Yeah, she said looking at the window at the ocean is one of the things she looked forward to most. For someone who is a Navy pilot and loves the water, being able to see the entire planet's oceans from above must be incredible.
What about the psychological challenge? Being stuck in a confined space with the same people for months.
NASA takes this really seriously. They do psychological screening before missions and provide support during flights. But Butch and Suni had advantages. They're both experienced astronauts who had done long-duration missions before. Butch spent 178 days in space across his previous missions. Suni had 322 days before this one.
So they knew what they were getting into mentally.
Right. And they've trained for years to work in these conditions. You learn to communicate effectively, manage conflicts, respect personal space, even when there isn't much of it. The crews are also very carefully selected for psychological compatibility.
Were they ever really in danger?
In terms of immediate life-threatening danger, no. They had food, water, air, power, all the necessities. The ISS is incredibly redundant, multiple backup systems for everything critical. If there had been an emergency, they could have evacuated in the Dragon capsule that was docked as a lifeboat.
But there was the broader question of how they'd eventually get home.
That was the uncertainty. From June to August, there was this unknown: would Starliner be safe, or would they need an alternative? That kind of ambiguity is probably harder psychologically than a clear crisis.
Because at least with a clear crisis, you know what you're dealing with.
Exactly. The waiting, the uncertainty, the constant testing and retesting while your return date keeps getting pushed back, that's a different kind of stress than acute danger.
How do you think they really felt about the situation?
I think publicly they were putting on their professional test pilot faces, calm, competent, we've got this. Privately, I imagine there were frustrating moments. Being away from family for 9 months unexpectedly, missing holidays and birthdays and normal life, knowing the whole world is watching your mission become this public spectacle.
And knowing it's not your fault, it's hardware failures beyond your control.
Right. They did everything perfectly. The problems were with the spacecraft, not with the crew. But they're the ones paying the personal cost.
Do you think they blame Boeing?
Publicly, they'd never say that, too professional, but in their post-return briefing, they mentioned they're scheduled to meet with Boeing leadership to discuss upgrades to Starliner. That's diplomatic speak for, we have some feedback about your spacecraft.
Pretty much. Though again, they'd phrase it much more diplomatically. Something like, we observed some performance characteristics that could benefit from design optimization.
Engineer speak for, fix your damn spacecraft.
Exactly.
All right, we're coming up on the end here. Let's talk big picture. What are the lessons from the Starliner crisis?
Lesson 1. Test flights are called test flights for a reason. The entire point of the crew flight test was to find problems before operational missions. In that sense, the mission succeeded. It found catastrophic problems that absolutely needed to be fixed.
But it also stranded 2 astronauts.
It extended their mission unexpectedly, yes. But here's the thing. Butch and Suni were never in mortal danger. They were on the ISS, which is a safe, well-supplied, redundant platform. If this had been a deep space mission or a lunar landing where rescue wasn't possible, that would be different.
So it was more inconvenient than dangerous.
From a pure survival standpoint, yes. The danger was in the potential return. If they'd tried to come home on Starliner and the thrusters had failed during deorbit, that could have been catastrophic. NASA made the right call.
Lesson 2?
Corporate culture matters in aerospace. Boeing's issues with Starliner are part of a larger pattern of quality control and safety culture problems across the company. You can't cut costs and corners in human spaceflight. The margins are too thin, the consequences too severe.
SpaceX seems to have figured that out.
SpaceX has a different culture. They iterate fast, they embrace failure as a learning tool. They're engineering-driven rather than finance-driven. That approach works well in the modern space industry.
But Boeing has decades more experience.
Institutional experience is valuable, but it's not everything. Sometimes a fresh perspective and modern approach can outperform legacy thinking. SpaceX built on NASA's knowledge, but wasn't constrained by "we've always done it this way."
What about the political lesson? This got dragged into partisan politics in a way that was pretty gross.
That's unfortunately inevitable when government programs and private companies intersect with high-profile situations. Both sides will try to spin it for political advantage. What bothered me most was the dishonesty, pretending there was an emergency rescue when NASA had a plan all along.
It cheapened the actual technical challenge.
Exactly. This was a complex engineering problem that required careful analysis and risk assessment. Turning it into political theater disrespects the work that NASA, Boeing, and SpaceX engineers were doing to solve the problem safely.
What's the future of commercial spaceflight after this?
Commercial Crew is still a success overall. SpaceX's Dragon has flown dozens of missions without major issues. Boeing's Starliner will eventually fly again after they address the problems. The model of NASA contracting with private companies is working. It's just working better with some companies than others.
Will Starliner survive as a program?
Tough to say. NASA still wants 2 providers for redundancy and competition, but Boeing has to prove Starliner is safe and reliable, which requires successful uncrewed and crewed test flights. They also need to control costs. They've already lost over $1.5 billion, and the ISS won't be around forever.
So the window is closing.
It is. If they can't certify Starliner by 2027, there might not be enough operational time left before ISS deorbits to justify continued investment. Though, if commercial stations launch as planned, that could extend the market.
What do you think Butch and Suni's legacy will be from this mission?
I think they'll be remembered as the astronauts who handled an impossible situation with grace and professionalism. They went from an 8-day test flight to a 9-month expedition without complaining, stayed positive throughout, did valuable work on the ISS, and returned safely.
The accidental long-duration crew.
Exactly. And Suni set a spacewalking record in the process. They turned a corporate and technical failure into a demonstration of what skilled, experienced astronauts can do when things go wrong.
That's actually pretty inspiring.
It really is. There's something very human about their response. They adapted, they made the best of it, they kept working. That's the astronaut ethos, distilled.
Do you think they'll fly again?
I think Suni Williams will be 60 this year. Butch Wilmore is 62. NASA doesn't have a mandatory retirement age for astronauts, but there's a practical question of whether they'd want to after this experience. If I had to guess, I'd say they might do 1 more mission each if offered, but they might also decide 9 unexpected months is enough and retire to spend time with family.
Fair enough. After all that, I think they've earned the right to choose.
Absolutely.
Okay, final question. What do we tell people who look at this story and think space exploration is too risky, too expensive, too prone to failure?
I tell them that spaceflight has always been hard, has always had setbacks, and has always required accepting risk. But we've learned from every failure, improved every system, and made space progressively safer. The ISS has been continuously inhabited for over 20 years. That's an incredible achievement.
And the Starliner situation, while embarrassing for Boeing, didn't result in any loss of life.
Because NASA was willing to make the hard call. They chose safety over schedule, over corporate relationships, over political pressure. That's the lesson. When you prioritize safety and rigorous engineering, you can handle problems without catastrophe.
Even if it means 2 astronauts spend 9 months longer in space than planned.
Even then, Butch and Suni are alive, healthy, and home. That's a success story, even if the path was messy.
All right, that's a good place to end. Elena, thank you for walking us through this incredible saga.
Thanks for having me, Marcus. It's been fun.
And if you want to follow the future of Starliner, whether it ever flies again with crew, keep an eye on NASA's Commercial Crew Program announcements. There will definitely be more chapters to this story.
Until next time, I'm Marcus Chen.
And I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez. Thanks for listening.
And seriously, maybe pack more than 8 days of clothes next time you go to space. Pro tip for future pilots.